Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards Podcast. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through this show, we share these stories of challenges and successes, from bloggers to podcasters to writers, speakers, and more. Today's guest is Michelle Jackson, who is driven to help her readers and listeners empower themselves financially. She runs a website and podcast, Michelle is Money Hungry, and is a founder of Money on the Mountain Retreat, focused on empowering financially single women one conversation at a time. In this episode, we talk about why financial unicorn content, as in the types of articles you read about how people paid off hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt or retired at 30, are doing a disservice to our audience members. Plus, what we can do as creators to foster genuine conversations while keeping in mind the need to grow our audience. Let's dive right into my conversation with Michelle Jackson. Michelle, welcome. It is always a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to make sure that it'll be in the show notes, the link to your episode of Financial Unicorn. I don't think that's the exact title, but it's about financial unicorn. So I thought we would talk about it from the perspective of a content creator. Before we start talking about tips and advice for others, talking about how to create more, approachable content, let's talk about you and your personal story of getting out of debt and reading some of the articles or podcasts out there. And how did you feel about it?
Well, I'm not going to tell too much of my story because that would take too much time. But what I will say is I had a significant part of my life overspending and not really understanding how to use money as a tool. So I was great at working. I had great work ethic, but in terms of money management skills, which I think a lot of personal finance content creators don't talk about enough, I just struggled with them. And then added to that, I ended up supporting a family member financially when they lost their job. So basically, my financial situation exploded in my face for a long time. And it took a really long time to rebound from that. And currently, I am at the tail end of a very long, quite frankly, debt repayment journey where I paid off well over $60,000 in unsecured debt. I have like $3,000 left of that. And then I still have student loans. However, what I would like to say is I got into personal finance because I had this really complicated debt story, and I started reading people's stories, and their stories really affected me because I learned that I wasn't the only person out there struggling with these things. And actually, when I first started following personal finance content and primarily reading stories about different content creators and what they were doing, many of them were on long-term personal finance journeys versus a lot of what we see now, these quick turnaround, sexy stories that I actually wonder why they get so much play in media, but we'll get into that in the conversation. But quite frankly, I loved reading about the person who's like, I had all these things going on and it took me 7 years to pay this off because I knew that it was going to take me at least 7 years to even dig through the bulk of the debt that I had, if not more. And so I really related to that and I really connected with those stories. And when I read stories where people were like, hey, I did this in 3 years, or I did this amazing thing in a year, I love those stories too, but I feel like at the time that I started really falling in love with personal finance content, when you would go online, it was just a lot more balanced. Like you would find both types of stories, so you could be inspired by both and not turned off because there was only one narrative being shared.
Yeah, let's talk about those sexy stories that you said. What's the term that you use, and what are some examples of those sexy stories that you see floating around now?
Well, I think currently it's this whole financial unicorn narrative. And again, there's always been a financial unicorn. And by that, what I mean is that person who's just that rarity, like a unicorn, where they're like, I had $742,000 in debt and I paid it off in 4 months. And you're like, the hell? Like, are you serious? And I wanted to use a different curse word, okay? But you sit there and you're like, wow, my story feels so not sexy. Like, all I've done is put $1 bill in front of the other, like one foot in front of the other, and just slowly but surely just paid off my debt. And sometimes I would struggle and sometimes it would be fast and like nothing about it was sexy. And so it was really disheartening, a little demoralizing reading those stories because that currently seems to be the narrative that really sells right now. And at the time we're recording this episode, it's the tail end of 2020. It's my personal view that the economy is in the tank. And I'm starting to think that the narrative of these financial unicorns is actually going to change because there are a lot of people who are like, holy crap, I didn't realize I was in debt until this situation happened. And I've got years to pay this off. Like it's going to take years to do this. And so I do think that this trend hopefully will balance out a little bit because I think there are a lot of people who right now are just like, I didn't realize my F-150 was a liability until COVID hit.
Do you feel like if you started writing about personal or podcasting as well about personal finance now and you're reading these stories because they're so pervasive, I guess, in the media to generalize, do you feel like you would have continued to create content?
I don't know if it would have been as attractive to me personally because it's just not my story. Like my story is not, it's not sexy at all. I am actually in the process of the beginning stages of writing my first personal finance book where I talk about all of this. I don't think that it would have been attractive to me to be in the personal finance space right now, just because I don't have a sexy story. And I think it would have deterred me and it would have been really unappealing to be in the personal finance space right now.
Let's switch gears and kind of flip it to the perspective of someone reading this type of content. Why do you feel like the financial unicorn or the stories of the financial unicorn become such a trend? Like, what is it that we feel that the audience wants where these stories are now coming up so often?
Well, I think there's a couple layers to this. So the first one is we as content creators and just the businesses that shares this type of content, we understand what SEO is, search engine optimization. So we understand that when people are searching for content, that certain things attract their eyes more easily than others. So certain titles are a lot more attractive than other titles. And so the title, hey, I paid off $100,000 in 3 months is a lot more attractive as a story than, hey, I paid off $100,000 in 8 years. Like it just is what it is. So I think that that's part of the problem. I think the other thing is for content creators, there's the idea, there's always this conversation about what is the problem that you're helping solve for your readers or for the people that you're trying to coach. Like, how are you helping them? And I think that this content gives this idea that we've got here's the quick fix solution. And with personal finance, in my view, unless you're selling a house, it's just not going to be a quick fix. Unless you're selling that F-150, because I discovered recently how expensive they are, it's not going to be a quick fix. And quite frankly, unless you really focus on behavior modification as the reader of said content, it's not going to be a quick fix. How do I know this? Because it's taken me 8 freaking years to clean up my financial habits. So and the process of paying off the debt, it wasn't just paying off debt, it was earning money. It was learning how to allocate it responsibly. It was working on my wants and needs. And literally, I have not physically gone into Target for almost 3 years now because Target is not my safe space. Target is the place where I walk in and I black out and I'm just like, Target. I hear the angels singing. I hear bugles and just beautiful music, and I just blank out. And so the weird thing with me and Target is I know that if my plan was to go in there and buy toilet paper, because I feel like that's very on trend right now. If I was going to go in there and buy toilet paper, I would actually go in there, black out for 3 hours, come back out and be like, what just happened? Because I would leave with a maxi dress, thank you cards. I always end up getting thank you cards on those trips where I black out. Wine, home decor, underwear, like socks, like it just, so I had to learn that Target, I cannot go to Target unless I put $300 in my wallet, because my natural like tendency is to overspend in that space because it makes me happy in there. So when I was paying off my debt, that was one of those learned behaviors I had to work through. Like I had to identify the things that I did that kept me from being successful. So my whole point with this is, as a content creator, creating helpful and useful content for my readers, I also have to be aware of what was a trigger for me, what kept me unsuccessful, what created roadblocks for me. And even though I think there are people with resources available to them where they can be a financial unicorn, it's my view that most people cannot, personally speaking.
Right. I'm curious about your thoughts. It's almost like this desire to capture attention that we, and I'm generalizing kind of the media, like the personal finance media in general, is that we're so caught up in this, like we're comparing ourselves to other content creators and we feel like we're competing against everybody for attention, that we have to almost find these financial unicorn stories to just capture the audience's attention. And it doesn't necessarily help them. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, I just think that's any type of content creator, whether it's someone in the home decor space or like any space that you can think of, or weight loss or, fashion or whatever. Like, because we understand what drives clicks and likes and things like that to content, I think that there is a real danger in only creating the content that drives clicks and likes. And that I think does a disservice to your own personal platform and also the people you serve. So I have never had like thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads and thousands of page views. Like I've over time I have, but I'm not like one of those people who has a website that has all these page views. Like that's not what's going on. My podcast has a lot more listens actually than my website. But my goal has always been, how can I be of service to the people who come to my space, my little corner in the internet world? Right now, that's an interesting conversation because we're in a pandemic. In my view, I personally think we're fighting for the life of my country. I'm American. And so my content is very much commingled with social justice. It always has been, actually. So for people who followed me for a long time, there are certain topics that I've like been talking about for years and years and years since I first started blogging. And maybe it wouldn't be as long a post, but I've always been pretty consistent. A couple times a year, I would bring something up. And so my content isn't always going to drive the kind of clickbait views, you know what I mean? Because I'm staying true to me and I'm staying true to who I want to serve. And sometimes it's just not sexy, and that's fine. And so I've made peace with the fact that I may not necessarily always have a billion downloads because I'm not focused on creating content in that way. I'm focused on how can I be, one, true to myself, which is really important. Like this is my legacy project. At this point, I've been doing this a long time. So it's really important for me when I'm 85 looking back and I'm like, I did this blogging and podcasting thing for a while. I don't want to look back at the content and be like, I had opportunities to say things that were important. I had opportunities to serve people in a certain way that was important, and I didn't do it. I don't want that to be the conversation. I want to be like, I took a stand And this is what I did. In the arc of my personal history, I did right by people. And that's really important to me.
What has been the feedback from your audience so far about what you've been creating?
They love it. That's the thing. It's like, I'm not creating for everybody. I'm creating for them. Maybe it's not thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I am serving people who respond to my content, who comment on it. It's interesting to me because a lot of people report that they don't get comments anymore. I still get comments. I get a lot of feedback about the different podcast episodes that I've recorded. Currently, I am a finalist for a Plutus Award for a piece of content that was literally the hardest piece of content I've ever created. And it was from a personal finance, social justice framework. And at first, I was like, I don't know that this is something I should do, but I think it's important. So I'm going to go ahead and say it. And that ended up being so well received beyond my wildest dreams, quite honestly. I was so shocked. And then to have my colleagues, which, I consider the people in the personal finance space, my colleagues to say, hey, we really appreciate what you did with this. That meant a lot to me. I was quite surprised. I cried a little bit.
Oh, that's nice. What I'm getting from what you've been saying so far, it's almost this binary or sort of question between getting someone's attention when you're creating content versus engagement and making sure that your content is helpful.
I think that's a great way to look at it, because the idea is if you're not getting enough views, who can you possibly be serving? Or if you have optimized your content and so you're trying to make money with affiliates and that kind of thing, how can you make money if you're not getting enough downloads? So I feel like those are reasonable questions, but at the same time, I have to be true to myself and it all will work out. So as a result of actually the content that I created and that piece that I did that I mentioned, I ended up getting quite a bit of unexpected work and collaborations and writing projects, which I had kind of stopped doing. Like I had stopped freelancing for quite a bit of time because I also make money with ebooks. And so that has allowed me to, I make money a lot of different ways, but I do make a nice amount with ebooks. And that money has allowed me to say no to projects that don't serve me well. And so this summer, it was kind of a turning point with my freelance business because I'd gotten vaguely back into it, but people saw what I was saying online, and the comments I make are true to my beliefs, and I got tons of work. And so I think that's something to think about is if you are consistent as a human, like across platforms in your content, that kind of thing, you will attract the right people to collaborate with, to make money with, that kind of thing. Whether you are a liberal, moderate, conservative, a little, whatever, because there are platforms for all of those viewpoints that make money. And if I were to pretend to be one thing, and then ultimately you go to my website and you're like, wait, that's different than what she shows online, that inconsistency would drive away any kind of collaborations I could do. So I literally got work online because I shared my views. I even shared that I didn't love freelance writing because I found the editors to be previously, like editors I've worked with in the past, to be unreasonable about their expectations based on the pay. I am upfront. And so this is where I think a lot of people make mistakes is they want to hide what they think and they prevaricate and then they slip and they tweet something. Right. So in my view, I'm just consistent and I'm like, this is what I think all the time. and I don't mean like just running at the mouth kind of thing. I just mean you just always consistently be in your truth, whether it's in your personal finance content, your behavior, whatever it is, just be consistent across the board because then it just makes life easier.
There are those that are listening that are probably fairly new to this, or they're trying to grow their audience because they think that, whether that's true or not, that it's going to help them ultimately get their version of success in business, whatever that is in the personal finance space. And so if they feel like they have to create this financial unicorn content, right? Some of that sexy stuff. And in truth, maybe that's going to do a disservice to their audience. Maybe it's going to unintentionally discourage them. Like, what would you say to someone? Like, how can they reflect on what they're creating so far in order to either continue because they're doing great, or to pivot because they're really not serving the people that they think they're serving?
Well, there's a couple different answers to that. So the first thing is you have to know who your audience is. Your audience could be a whole bunch of financial unicorns, to be honest. And your audience could be a whole bunch of people who are able to duplicate the success that you did because they have the resources to do so. So that's a different conversation. So if I were to have started writing about, oh yeah, I paid off $100,000 in 1 year, it might be likely that I attract other people who may have the ability to do the same. Or it's likely that I attract people to that message because it's aspirational. It just kind of depends on who you attract to your platform. And so the key is you have to have these conversations with the people who are attracted to the work that you're doing. And as you have those conversations, then you figure out what the commonality is between you and them. And then you can move from there. So again, it could be that you're attracting a whole bunch of other people who totally have the ability to do what you did. They can, live in their parents' mother-in-law basement apartment and not have to pay rent and all that kind of stuff. I couldn't do that. I was taking care of my mom. That was not going to be on my list of things I could do. So it depends. Your priority, or rather your task as a content creator, is to know who your audience is. And there's a lot of different ways to figure that out pretty easily. You have conversations with them. You ask questions, and not like you can do it in person. You can do it on Instagram. You can do it on Twitter. You can do it on Facebook. Like, it's not hard to have those conversations. You can create your podcast and end with a question. So it's up to you to figure out who they are, but you have to pay attention. And if you're not paying attention, you could be 2 years in and one day you're randomly doing a survey and they're like, "Oh, this is what we like about you." And you're like, "The hell? I had no idea." You know what I mean? Like, you would be really surprised. So you have to constantly have conversations with them. However, I'll be honest, like, sometimes I just create content that speaks to me. Part of why that's important is I want to still be excited about doing what I do. I have to also be of service to me as I create content. So some pieces I just feel energetically compelled to do. This week, the week that we're recording this episode, I am actually working on a podcast episode specifically focused on my international friends, as well as, and a lot of them are personal finance people, but just for our international friends outside of the United States who I feel like don't really understand what's going on and how we're feeling. And I felt like that piece of content was really important because I was getting mad at people. And I was getting mad because I was like, you don't get what's going on. And this is problematic on so many levels. So I decided that this was a piece of content that I needed to create. I create content to help me avoid conversations. So the piece of content that I have been nominated as a finalist for the Plutus Awards, I created that piece of content so I wouldn't have to keep having conversations about what was going on during the Black Lives Matter protests. Because energetically for me, I knew I couldn't do it. I was so tired and I was like, I don't want to have this conversation over and over again. So I recorded that episode and people would reach out and be like, well, what do you think? And I'm like, here's my episode. Listen to it. Like, if you really want to know what I think, I want you to listen to me uninterrupted during this show. Because if I'm having a conversation, you're going to interrupt me, right? And I'm going to maybe change my thoughts or just skip a thought. So I actually a lot of times will record an episode and direct people to them so that I don't have to answer questions and save my energy. And it's a great strategy, by the way, for those of you out there wondering. It saved me a lot of energy this summer.
I love that. I'm going to take that tip actually with me. So bringing it back to the whole idea of creating content to get someone's attention versus engagement or helpful content, right? Like what I mean by that is you're just getting someone's attention to click through to your link versus what do they do afterwards, right? Or is this relevant to them? So bringing it all back, if you were to start over again, right? Or let's say you back to when you first started and you're kind of in this like thick of it, you're trying to figure out what you want and you're still in that whole getting out of debt phase and kind of go through all the motions. Like what is one thing you wish you can go back and tell yourself?
I think the only thing I would have done better is actually two things. I would have utilized Pinterest better, to be honest. I think Pinterest was where I really lost an opportunity big time. And I say this because I used to be in a mastermind group with Rosemary Groner as one person at Talat and Ty McNeely. Like I was in a mastermind with some like rock stars, and they were really, Rosemary in particular, were really able to leverage Pinterest and get people on her email list. And that was the one area that I just did not do well in. But would I change what I've done? No. So I did what was right for me, but I think it also speaks to what is the purpose of the content you're creating, what's your goal. And at the time, like my goal was just to like be like vaguely consistent. At the time, my goal was just to share a story and hopefully help people. I wasn't trying to monetize. I wasn't trying to do any of that. This question actually speaks to what are your goals? And I think as we create content, your goals change. So initially my goal, again, was just to tell a story and if I could connect and help one person, I could. Over time, I've changed and my needs have changed. So now I want to make money as I serve people because this is now my job. Like I consider it my job and my career and my calling. So what I do has to be different. Now, do I create content that I feel like attracts people's eyeballs? Of course. But I'm also mindful that as I create that content, how is it of service to the people who are going to engage with it? Like, what's the point of having them click on it or listen to a show or whatever, and then they get nothing from it? It's a waste of my time and it's a waste of theirs. So I'm always very careful about what is the end result for them versus what's the end result for me. If they win, then I win, and that will make me money, to be honest. So if they're like, every time I come to Michelle's like content, it never works. It's just such a waste of time. Then that's not going to work, right? But if people are like, this got me thinking, or this tip was so helpful, or that slow process, that slow but sure solution to other people's problems and service-oriented focus has really served me well. Am I a millionaire? No. Am I making more money? Yes. Am I developing products and projects that I really feel proud of? Yes. Am I able to network with people to grow my brand? Yes. Like all the things that you would want to say yes to, I'm able to say yes to. Was my pace a little slower than I would like looking back? Yes. But it doesn't matter. Like I'm really happy with where I'm at now because the journey has prepared me for that. By the way, for all of you guys listening, if you're a content creator and you're thinking that overnight you're going to be this rock star, all of my friends and I laugh. We laugh. We're like, yeah, we're an 8-year overnight sensation. Like consistently. I joked with the Marcus Garrett last week about this. Sandy Smith, my friend Elle Martinez, like all these people that I've known for years. They've been working at this for years. In fact, Michelle Schroeder Gardner had been working it took her 3.5, 4 years to get to the success that she's created with her platform. So this idea that, what you're doing everything will just pop off overnight, that's bull. It just is. And that would be a content creation unicorn, to be honest. The rest of us are going to tell you the truth, which is it's going to take a while. And it is totally possible that you can have that success or whatever, but you have to learn a lot of lessons. You have to learn how to manage your money. You have to learn to be consistent. You have to learn how to network. You have to learn how to attract high-paying projects. You have to learn how to publicly speak. You have to learn, like, as an entrepreneur in this space, there's a ton of lessons that you have to learn, and those lessons learned don't happen overnight. And so I think that is what I want to leave you guys with is, yeah, there are a lot of things I could have changed along the way, but I feel like I'm still at the same trajectory as other people. Because they're like, yeah, it's been an 8-year overnight success. And I'm like, oh, wait, I'm 8 years in. So, okay, I feel good about it. So don't worry about other people's journey. Just focus on what you're doing and pay attention. Ask the questions, speak to your community, and be of service, ultimately.
Amen, girl. Amen. So, Michelle, where can everyone find you online and check out more of your awesome work?
You can find me at michelleismoneyhungry.com. That is my website. Or you can find the show, Michelle is Money Hungry, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, different apps. I'm pretty active on Instagram and Twitter. On Twitter, you'll find me at Mitch Loves Money. Again, like I said, I'm consistent about, I share what I think. So I talk about social justice. I talk about money. I talk a lot about Colorado. So, because that's where I'm from. And I actually have another website about that. So definitely follow what I'm up to. I'm not filtered.
Well, Michelle, again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Before we catch up with a previous Plutus Awards winner, let's take a look at some lessons we can learn from my conversation with Michelle. So number 1, are you creating content simply to capture attention, or is it to engage with your community? So in my conversation with Michelle, we had talked a lot about clickbait type articles or more sensationalized stories in order to get people over to our website or to our podcast. And it's great that you want to create content that captures somebody's attention because, let's be honest, there's a lot out there. What are you going to do once you get that attention? Are you going to engage with your community? What is the next step for them? If what you have to say isn't relevant to the person that has come over to your website, they're going to be turned away pretty quickly. Lesson number 2 is think about creating content for the search engines and balancing out with genuine content. So it goes back to point number 1 where, yes, you want to keep in mind you need to be found or you want to be found, whether that's for the search engines or finding some way to get your audience's attention. But again, you need to balance it in a way where you're actually doing them a service. You're actually providing them with practical tools and strategies and steps in order for them to better their financial lives or whatever it is that you're trying to help them with. And then lesson number 3 is think of entrepreneurship or your financial journey as a marathon. Michelle talked a lot about how her debt repayment journey was very messy. It took a long time. It wasn't as sexy. And it was the same with her entrepreneurial journey. She's at a place where she's pretty happy. Things are going very well, but it really took a long time to get there. And so really what we can take away from that is if you're too focused on creating content simply for the search engines or creating super sensationalized headlines or content simply to grab the reader's attention or the listener's attention, and that's it, you're not really looking at a long-term solution. And that's what's going to help you grow your business. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Now over to Harlan Landis, the founder and executive director of the Plutus Foundation.
We recently checked up on some of our previous Plutus Awards winners to find out what's been happening since their win. They called in to keep us in the loop. Here's Amanda Abea.
Hey, this is Amanda Abea of amandaabea.com and author of Make Money Your Honey. I won the Plutus Award 2016 for Best Designed Personal Finance Blog. And 2016 was the year things really started moving for me in a new direction. I'd been in the finance community a few years, but it hadn't quite grown the way I wanted it to. And after I won the Plutus Award, that is when things really started shifting and changing and really blowing up. I started teaching marketing and sales training. I ended up working with amazing brands to teach personal finance. As of right now, that same website, we literally still have the same design. It just worked for so many years, and to this day, people are like, oh my gosh, your website is so great. We're actually in the process of upgrading it a little bit right now, but don't worry, there will not be major changes, just little tweaks here and there. So thank you, Plutus, so much for recognizing our hard work all those years ago. And thank you for all the opportunities that it opened up for us.
Thank you so much for listening to the Plutus Awards podcast. By the way, the Plutus Awards is a virtual event this year that's coming soon. So make sure you grab your free ticket at plutusawards.com.